Okay, so happy Bloomsday. It's my pleasure to start this conference, this session of our conference with Professor André Leclerc's talk, Our Knowledge of Fictional Characters. Professor Leclerc is a professor at the Universidade de Brasília, here in Brazil. He is a very influential figure for the Brazilian philosophical community in Brazil. Sorry about that. And he has written some books, of which Uma Introdução à Filosofia da Mente, An Introduction to the Philosophy of Mind, is one of the most recent ones. And he has written also some articles about about actualism and fictional characters and artifacts, the big picture in broad terms, even if though this one is not specifically about artifacts or fictional characters as artifacts, it deals with the notion of artifact in a broader intentional context. So let's hear you, André. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Glad to have you here.
Well, you are hearing me, huh? Okay. So first things first, thank you very much, Italo and Jesse, for your kind invitation. Thank you to CMPK for financing my research precisely on that themes of semantics and ontology of fictional discourse. So let's do that. Okay, well, is that knowledge possible at all? That refer to our knowledge of fictional character, of course. So I shall defend that we do have genuine knowledge of fictional character. The problem is to justify that thesis. This is not a piece of cake, as we will see. I believe that the right way to do that is to put together many different aspects of the problem in a consistent way. There are semantic aspects, for instance, the reference of fictional names in and out fictional discourse. Later, I will distinguish an internal perspective from an external perspective. And the question of reference of fictional names must be seen very differently in these two cases. And I believe that we have to introduce the notion of a special kind of predicates that do not involve concreteness. The standard expression is predicate involving existence, but I prefer concreteness for reasons that will appear later. Ontological aspects, I will adopt the idea of abstract artifacts developed by mainly by Amy Thomason with their material base and the idea of representation-dependent properties introduced by Colin McGinn in his booklet of 2000, Logical Properties, the chapter on existence. Phenomenal aspects, fictional characters are apprehended in a very special way, always as an individual, complete individual, in spite of all the indeterminations. And the thought we have about them are singular thought, not their thought. I agree with Tim Crane on that score, that what makes a singular thought singular is not necessarily the direct relation with an external object. And epistemological aspects, of course. I will defend that we have recognitional and propositional knowledge about fictional characters. Well, the problem is put in a very simple way. If I believe that alpha is F, I can be wrong in two different ways. Either because alpha is not F, does not have the property expressed by the predicate, or because alpha simply does not exist. Usually, knowledge is broadly construed. But if I know that alpha is F, then alpha must exist somehow. I cannot know that something that does not exist is F. I cannot know, for instance, that poltergeists are frightening creatures. This is not a piece of knowledge. If I know that Mount Denali is the highest mountain in North America, then surely Mount Denali exists and instantiates the relevant property. Now, in the literature on intentionality, Sherlock Holmes, Hamlet, Zorro, Superman, 007 are standard examples of non-existent intentional object. You will see that I disagree with that. But the question is, so how is it possible at all to have knowledge about a fictional character? I believe it is useful to have some previous conditions of adequacy. The sentence in the scope of knowing that, or any other epistemic operator like to be sure that, etc., must be literally true. This is a stipulative condition. Singular terms in referential position must have a referent. The assertive force must have the required degree of strength. It must not be a mere suggestion or a hypothesis. It must have a degree of strength sufficient to be counted as a piece of knowledge, or an assertion strong enough for knowledge. The proposition it expresses must be roughly in accordance with our background knowledge. For instance, certainly it is true in the story that Holmes has a belly button. Conan Doyle does not say a word about that, but not having a belly button would be so striking feature that certainly he would have said something about that. So we have a right to believe that in the story Holmes has a belly button, because usually people have a belly button. So it must be roughly in accordance with our background knowledge, social and natural regularities. And finally, it must be a piece of serious discourse. So the sentence in the scope of the epistemic operator must be a serious discourse, a piece of serious discourse. It is the tradition in semantics, philosophical semantics, since Frege, to try to explain how the meanings of complex linguistic expressions depends solely on the meanings of its part plus the way they are combined when these complex expressions are used literally and seriously. This is clear from what we can read in Frege's work, that the main target of semantics are the meaning of complex expression used literally and seriously. But the intuitive notion of serious discourse is in use by many philosophers since then, always in opposition to fictional discourse. It is well known that for Frege, sentences of fictional words are neither true nor false. They don't have true value because the existential presupposition is not satisfied. So, well, the problem is that that idea does not work very well for parafictional discourse. We'll see later. So some people, sometimes we can find this in the literature, I believe it is a mistake, try to look at fictional discourse as a kind of non-literalness. The sentence that compose a fictional work are not different from the sentence of serious discourse. Consider the following sentence taken from the novel, Conan Doyle's novel, A Scandal in Bohemia, when Watson writes, quote, he was, I take it, the most perfect reasoning and observing machine that the world has seen. Here, the only word used metaphorically is the word machine. The rest of the sentence is literal. So the distinction literal, non-literal holds also in fictional discourse. The seriousness of discourse is something quite different. You can find this kind of allusion to non-literality in fictional discourse here and there in the literature. The last time I saw it was in a paper by Hammy Thomason, published in Dialectica, speaking on fictional characters. But well, I hold quite a lot to Hammy Thomason's idea, but I do not believe that fictional discourse has something to do with non-literality. Yeah, so as I said, the sentence in the scope of an epistemic operator must be serious, a piece of serious discourse, My intention is to try to define, and the real challenge is to define in a non-circular way what serious discourse is. It has been suggested in the Freudian perspective that endorsement would be the mark of a serious discourse. A serious discourse is one that is endorsable. Would be a discourse that would be parasitic on serious discourse. That may sound correct at first sight, but if a serious discourse is one that is endorsed by the agent in the context of use, then we must provide an analysis of what endorsing means in that context. Otherwise, if endorsing is discourse, endorsing a discourse means something roughly like taking discourse seriously, it seems that we do not take a step forward. It's clearly circular. Intuitively, the idea sounds good, but we have to analyze further, to dig deeper. In a different perspective, I think it has been defended by Direct Retrievers in his book 2014, Narrative and Fiction. The idea of the difference would be the idea of cancellation. Phenomenologically, there is no superficial difference between understanding a serious discourse and understanding a work of fiction. In both cases, we form mental models on how the world is if the assertions are true. The assertions, in inverted comma, in fictional discourse, the commitment to truth would be cancelled. In that case, maybe cancellation means roughly the same as not taken seriously anymore. And so it seems to me. So we are still running in a circle. I'm not sure that there is something like phenomenologically, it means it is that we have an access to something like an act of cancellation. I think that writers and readers collude even before the make-believe game starts. There is a kind of pact between writers and readers, and we do not, in the middle of the reading of a fictional discourse, fictional narrative, cancelled for instance, our commitment to truth. So I suggest that we have to dig deeper. So my suggestion is start with some ideas of the speech acts theory. When we feel or presuppose that we have a right to trust the speaker and to expect the truth or the satisfaction of illocutionary acts performed, something like what follows could be at least a start. Well, I hope it is not a non-starter. So a sequence S of illocutionary acts performed by an agent A constitutes a serious discourse, if and only if, first, He does everything necessary to perform each element of S. That means A perform all the utterance acts relevant for the sequence. Two, he has good reasons for expecting that the conditions of success and satisfaction of the acts in S are fulfilled. Speech acts with a direction of fit have conditions of success and satisfactions. So the idea of conditions of satisfaction is a generalization from the notion of conditions of truth, a truth condition. And finally, A perform as expecting the satisfaction of his or perlocutionary intention or plans. In action theory, I believe the notion of plans is quite central. If you want to learn something interesting about human agency, you have to use something like a notion of plans. So it is extremely rare to perform an isolated action. Actions usually are parts of plans. And the same holds for discourses, which are sequences of elocutionary act, ways to achieve perlocutionary plans. The perlocutionary is the motor of communication. We perform elocutionary act in order to convince, in order to irritate, to please, there are thousands of perlocutionary verbs, but usually when we perform elocutionary act, we have the intention to achieve some plans, perlocutionary plans. Elocutionary acts are generated conventionally through the performances of basic acts of the type utterance act. In serious discourse, there is no simulation of the elocutionary point. But that could happen in fictional discourse. The utterance act in serious discourse and the utterance act in the fictional discourse could be the same. Maybe we can read in Conan Doyle novel that our detective get out his home and walk in the direction of Whitechapel, for instance. That could be a piece of serious discourse written in a newspaper. So there is no superficial difference as to the utterance act performed in a serious discourse and a fictional discourse. Well, in serious discourse, we expect our plans to be achieved satisfactorily. Well, the idea of a game of make-believe or simulation seems to me right. So I adopt that these ideas. Any human action can be simulated. And this holds for elocutionary acts. Utterance acts are real in serious discourse and fictional discourse as well. They are performed, but the effect is not the same. as I said earlier to Iago, an assertion uttered in fictional discourse does not really pretend to describe a fact. It is not the intention of the writer to describe and to say how things are. So the illocutionary point is only simulated. It is not, there is no real attempt to achieve the illocutionary point in fictional discourse. So I lent some money to someone who promised me to pay me back in 1 month. Was the promise sincere? Most of the time, in real life, we have the right to expect that the conditions of satisfaction of assertions and other illocutionary acts are fulfilled. That's what we do. We presuppose that a promise will be kept, that an order will be carried out, that an apology is sincere, etc. So serious illocutionary acts have consequences and can affect our lives in many different ways. A promise made by an actor on the stage during a play has no real consequences for his life, for the lives of the other protagonists of the play, or for the spectators in the assistants. Illocutionary acts have conditions of success and conditions of satisfaction. These are two semantic values of illocutionary act. If an illocutionary act is performed with success, depends on some component of the force, mainly the illocutionary point, that determines other component of the force. And the condition of satisfaction, are also very important in real life. We do worry about the truth of assertions we hear or we read in a newspaper. When we put ourselves in the successfully under the obligation to do something, it may happen that some events happened so that we are unable to honor our promise, but the condition of satisfaction is something we expect. In cases like these, an illocutionary act is performed with success, but not necessarily satisfied. An ideal illocutionary act is one that is performed with success, is satisfied, and sincere. This was broad characterization of what a serious discourse is. Now I will try to comment on the other component of or characteristics of a sentence on fictional discourse that could be in the scope of an epistemic operator. Predicates, most predicates are concreteness involving. I'm not saying existence involving like Graham Priest, but it is exactly because I believe that at the time of taking a non-tick decision, time is important, not only the occupation of three-dimensional space. So concreteness is not everything. Fictional characters are introduced at some moment in time, and they are identified, they re-identified by many people in a community, more or less like theories. They need a material base, like institutions, but they do not have concreteness. So most predicates are concreteness involving. For instance, X is a detective, X is a horse, but some predicates are not concreteness involving. X is a fictional detective. X is a mythical horse. Holmes, the sentence, Holmes is a detective, is seriously and literally false. But it is true that Holmes is a fictional detective and that Pegasus is a mythical horse. So the corresponding properties of these predicates that are not concreteness involving, the corresponding properties are what Colin McGinn called representation-depending properties, like being a fictional detective, being a mythical horse, etc. So we can have something like a canonical form for these predicates, something like according to the story, X is F, or X is a fictional F. In the internal perspective, when we get involved in the reading of a novel or attending a play, we start playing a game of pretense or make-believe. We get involved and we get interested. We enter a special temporality. Here are described sequences of events, and we are assisting, so to speak, the evolution of the characters and their deeds. We close the book, and that temporality suddenly stops. When we open the book, it starts again. The internal perspective is the one we adopt when we are enjoying a work of fiction. We get involved in mind reading with the characters described by the author. What a pity Holmes cannot have the life he would like to have with Irene Adler. We feel we have sympathy for the authors. In the internal perspective, the very characters are attributing each other the mental states. So as long as we do it, we do not think about Holmes as a fictional character, and we do not care about the kind of properties our favorite character instantiates, if they involve concreteness or not. Rather we find it as a person, a complete person with all the standard, usual physical characteristics of a real person. He has a belly button, for instance. Okay, in the external perspective, the perspective in which we talk about fiction, by producing parafictional sentences, like Holmes has been created in March 1886, Sherlock Holmes is more famous than Hercule Poirot. These sentences are intuitively true. Fictional names do not refer in the internal perspective. Conan Doyle is just pretending to refer to a person named Sherlock Holmes. He is not, as Stephen Schiffer's words in his book of 2003, the things we mean, said in a very funny way that he is not failing miserably to refer. As a matter of fact, he did not even try to refer. He does not even try. Failing, suppose an attempt to refer, and there is no attempt in the internal perspective. However, fictional names are not empty. They are not ambiguous either. So I believe I have a word with Alberto Voltolini yesterday about that. I believe that fictional names are not empty because in the internal perspective, there is no attempt to refer. In the external perspective, in parafictional sentence, they do refer, but they do refer to something that there must be some candidate to the referent of empty names in parafictional sentences. And my favorite candidate is an abstract artifact. So, two quotes from Saul Kripke. He says that, I quote, in a rough and ready way, the apparatus of quantification and identity over these fictional characters is available to us in ordinary language. They are not fictional characters, ghostly possible entities. They are abstract entities of a certain sort that exist in virtue of activities of people, mental activities. And again, from reference and essence, I mean that there are certain fictional characters in the actual world, that these entities actually exist. They are something like cultural objects. And I believe that Thomason gave a quite convincing characterization of these artifacts in their material base, because they they need material base. So it could be token books, CDs, films, the performance of an actor on the stage, etc. Without that, there couldn't be fictional discourse, fictional characters. I think that what Kripke has in mind is something like what in the medieval philosophy has been called ensia per alio. That is, the things whose identity depend on the identity of something else, like shadows. Shadows exist. They can be seen by different peoples. They could be measured, but they would be nothing without an object in the way of a source of light. So these things depend upon a material base through which they are known, as Thomason has shown. The same holds for institutions. The Brazilian STF, the Supreme Court of Brazil, cannot be identified with a building. It is not a set of element judges. It has, but it would be strange, to say the least, to claim that the STF does not exist, for instance. Clearly it exists, and clearly it needs a material base to perform its proper function of giving the last word in juridical matters. So more or less the same holds for fictional characters. The relation between the material basis and what we learn and discovered about a fictional discourse is something like the supervenience relation. From a pretending use of a proper name, a character is created with many specific attributes attached to it. Once this is done and made available, each one of us can think about it, refer to it, and speak about it. The character cannot be changed or enriched without changing something in the material or physical basis. It is astonishing to see what the movie industry do with a character like Robin Hood. There are new adventures, new setting, new stories regularly launched by this industry. This is possible to enrich the material base with new scripts. All cultural objects, including institutions and work of art, are two-tier. They need a material basis in which they are embodied. This is the expression used by Joseph Margolis. But they cannot be identified with that basis. Like the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is not a building, is not a set of a group of 11 judges. Donatello's David could be reproduced in wood or in bronze. It will continue to be recognizably the same work of art, that is the same David, not as precious as the original, of course, but with exactly the same traits, the same represented attitude. Otherwise, there could not be an industry of counterfeit and forgery. So we have recognitional knowledge. We recognize Holmes as the same character through different interpretation by different actors in different settings. If Kripke and Thomason are right, Holmes, the character, must have an individual essence, citing some essential properties that make the character recognizable. It could be maybe something like that. The Holmes individual essence would be a composition. I use lambda notation for expressing it. Characteristic like X having been created by Conan Doyle in 1886. Here I use the origin of the character. So it is an essential properties relative to the origin of the character. X being a fictional Londoner detective with fabulous observational and inferential powers, and X getting bored easily in the stories, and X having the fictional Dr. Watson as his sole friends. That are characteristics that we found in all the novels by Conan Doyle, and even in new scripts. There is a movie, Mr. Holmes, where Holmes is a very old person trying to take care of bees because he believed that the honey of these produced by these bees could help him to maintain intact his memories. So he worried about that. He traveled to Japan, and even in that movie, they are mentioned to Dr. Watson, and the same characteristics are present. To identify and re-identify something as an episteme is an epistemic ability, know-how, a part of the background knowledge. But when it comes to fictional character, that knowledge cannot be derived, but they are known through their material base. We cannot have a direct knowledge of Sherlock Holmes, but there are a material base through which we know him, and Sherlock Holmes exists in possible worlds in which that material base exists. Otherwise, the idea that there is a possible world in which exist Sherlock Holmes of flesh and blood that would be a person of flesh and blood, if that word would be the actual one, to me sounds absolutely crazy. So when we refer to Holmes, our mental target is something introduced at some moment in time, but with no concreteness. So time is important at the time of taking an ontic decision. You know? I think we do something like that with theories, theorem. We would say that it would be strange to say that the relativity theory does not exist, for instance. It has been introduced at some moment in time, or in an interval of time, and we accept that. And I believe that there is something similar with the fictional characters. So in spite of all the indetermination, Holmes is always grasped as a complete individual. Conan Doyle does not say a word about the size of Holmes' shoes, but when we think about the character, we just complete these gaps. I think Alberto Voltolini said something about that. We have a right to believe, for instance, that Holmes has a belly button. Because it would be so striking characteristics, not having a belly button, so that certainly the other would have said something about that. But in the absence of any description, relevant description, we have a right to believe that the character is as complete as any other human being. So it is, the character is apprehended as something singular. The thought we have about the character are singular. We do have propositional knowledge as well of fictional character. When the sentence in the scope of an epistemic operator, like knowing that, is a parafictional serious sentence. A parafictional sentence can be true. Many of them are true. Like Sherlock Holmes has been created in March 1886. And when the fictional characters, when the fictional names, with the fictional names referring to abstract artifacts, because somehow the existential presupposition must be satisfied. So the best candidate, in my view, is an abstract artifact, well in the line of Kripke and Thomason. The assertion it expresses has an appropriate degree of strength. As I said, it cannot be a mere suggestion or a hypothesis. When the predicate does not involve concreteness, and when it expresses a representation-dependent properties, when all these conditions are satisfied, so we have a propositional, we can have a propositional knowledge of fictional characters. Then we can be sure that most people know that Sherlock Holmes is more famous than Hercule Poirot, that he still inspires today's detectives, and that he is a famous fictional detective, being more famous than and inspiring are predicates that do not involve concreteness. Being more famous presuppose mental activity. Many people thinking about Holmes more than about Poirot, and detective thinking about Holmes as a model. Well, in conclusion, a sentence of the form alpha is a fictional F can express genuine knowledge. So thank you very much. I hope I respected the time. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Leclerc, for your excellent talk. Do we have questions? Yes, we have questions. Alberto. Sorry, I have to just, okay, now I think you can unmute, yes.
Yes, can you hear me? I think so. Okay. Thanks a lot, André. It was very stimulating and interesting. I have basically a clarification question. If you say that a fictional character is something that we refer to outside pretense in what you call parafictional sentences, and it is individuated in terms of an essence that is constituted by either the properties, the external properties, say, that we ascribe in such sentences, or the representation-dependent properties, as you say, such as being a fictional detective, being a fictional friend of Watson, and so on and so forth. Why do you say that we cannot have the real knowledge of a fictional character? For when you say that we have a propositional knowledge, it seems to me quite compatible with the fact that we read the relevant sentences even in the de-re mode, as if the name scoped out, so to speak, of the operator. So, for instance, it seems natural if we take thinking that way to say that of Holmes, we know that he was created by Conan Doyle, that he was more famous than other detectives, for fictional detectives, that he was in the fiction a close friend of Watson, and so on and so forth. I can't see why is this precluded by your account.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I will have to give some more thought on that subject, but I associate their beliefs, or their thought, strongly to knowledge by acquaintance. And the kind of acquaintance we have with a fictional character can only be through the material base. So it is something that indirect, so to speak, the kind of, well, you can have linguistic constructions. It can be said of Holmes that he has Watson as a known friend. That look like dairy sentence. But I'm not sure. Some people like Plantinga says that des ré, des dictos are only alternative way to say the same. So I'm not quite sure. It depends on the definition of what is a dairy thought, and I know there is a lot of discussions on that topic, but I'm not quite decided. I think the difficulty maybe I'm seeing is the lack of concreteness. The lack of concreteness is not an impediment to accept in our ontology an abstract artifact, but for being abstract, we cannot have the kind of relationship with Holmes that we have with a flesh and blood person. We cannot shake hand, we cannot offer tobacco to him, so things like that. Is it possible to have a dairy thought about an institution like the Supreme Court? I use this like as a comparison. I doubt this is possible. So through a very indirect way. But I have to think again about that and to get deeper in this subject. Thank you for your answer.
So if I got you right, you have a sort of general qualms concerning the possibility of having their knowledge of abstract entities in general. So you would be ready to expand your point, say, even to natural numbers, say.
Yeah, it seems to me that theories are a good case in point. Natural numbers, I don't know, the number 0, for instance, has been introduced lately. Platonists would say that the number exists, is something eternal. But if we accept the idea of abstract artifacts with a material base, the kind of characteristic of abstract entities that are typically Platonic doesn't work. They are not fictional character are not mind independent, world independent, existing of eternally. So in the case of numbers, I would hesitate. But some other cases like theorems or theories seems to me quite straightforward. Okay, thank you, Roberto.
We have a question from Julia.
Hi, thank you. Excuse me. This was quite fascinating. I have a more targeted question concerning the ontological and more temporal status of fictive objects. I'm inclined to agree with your thesis that we have genuine knowledge about fictional characters, but I'm wondering how the ontological pillars that support your argument differentiate between fictional objects and the dead. For example, how can it distinguish between I'm going to pet the Cheshire cat and I'm going to bury my deceased father? Because both objects, the Cheshire cat and my deceased father, technically lack extension. But the fact of the matter is that my father did exist at some point, but no longer does. I'm hesitant to describe my deceased father as fictive, but I don't see how this difference is ontologically distinct from utterances about the Cheshire cat. So is there an ontological hierarchy here?
Oh, I'm not sure I got your point. You are trying to extend the case to past even or objects that are not anymore in say part of our ontology. Your dad is a person. I hope he is not dead, but he is a person. But being a person and being a dead body are two different things. The person does not exist anymore. It can be this something like you can write legend about a person who passed away. And these legends can be widely shared about, but one of my students gave me the example of traditions. Sometimes the traditions start with some facts and that are not the description of these facts are not quite correct, and the tradition is based on something false, something fake, you know. But it is a tradition, something that become widely shared. In Brazil, there are people believing that the dictatorship has been something great, marvelous. We all know that this is not the case, but for these people, it is something it seems they are missing. I don't know. In order to speak about past events, past characters or living person that are not anymore alive. Well, these are not constructions. They are not created. I believe that the correct view on fictional characters is that they are created. I reject the Graham Priest view that they cannot be created. Holmes cannot have been created because it does not exist, and what does not exist cannot have been created. I think that creating a fictional character can involve mental activity, and well, there wouldn't be a Hamlet without Shakespeare's scribbles. Something has to be done. Something shareable has to be done, and so this is what we have in most cases for a living person now dead. These persons has not been created, at least not in the same way. So that's something that could, yeah. I don't know if I answered your question. Are you satisfied with that, or?
Thank you for answering my question. I guess I was just a little bit confused about what I would think to be a kind of ontological fuzziness between like the status of the dead and the status of fictive entities. So I guess that was the tension I was trying to express. And I'm sorry if I didn't get that across.
No, that's okay. I believe that the difference is the fact that fictional characters has been created. Patchy, okay, Graham Priest. So real people are different, of course. Are not the result of an act of creation. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Italo?
All right, so thank you very much, Professor Leclerc, for your presentation. I am a realist, more specifically an artifactualist as well, so I am sympathetic to your perspective. And I agree with you when it comes to this kind of knowledge you're talking about, this knowledge about fiction, I would say, because if I read A Study in Scarlet, and according to the story, Sherlock Holmes is a detective, I can parafictionally say that I know that Sherlock Holmes is a fictional detective. All right. But I would like also to ask you if you have considered the possibility of us acquiring knowledge not only about fiction, but through fiction, in the sense that when I read, for example, Crime and Punishment from Dostoevsky, I come to know that Raskolnikov is a fictional murderer, but at the same time, I come to know something really important about the human psychology. Or when I read the Sherlock Holmes stories, I come to know that Holmes is a fictional detective, but at the same time, I come to know something about the streets of London. And so it goes. I would like to ask you if you think that such kind of knowledge, this knowledge through fiction, is possible, and if it is, if the same account you're presenting here works for this kind of knowledge I'm talking about. And thank you very much once again.
Oh, thank you for your question, Italo. Fictional work can teach a very serious lesson. So the distinction I tried to present between serious discourse and fictional discourse does not exclude the possibility of gaining knowledge, important knowledge, moral knowledge through fiction. So serious discourse can be funny, and the fictional work can teach serious, very serious lesson. Yeah, you mentioned Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky is one of a kind in this on that score. Charles Dickens too. Les Misérables of Victor Hugo. These are great works of fiction, and we learn quite a lot. I think these works should be in the curriculum of many people working in public service, particularly judges and delegates of policemen, etc. So I would like to be empowered to impose such because it is important for our humanity to be in contact with these great works of fiction. Yeah, so I agree with you. The work of fiction can teach us great lessons. Yeah, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the talk. I hope you can hear me okay. So I was really glad you brought up the recognitional epistemology when it comes to characters, right? Like we recognize them even though they are presented across different works, sometimes with changes to them, right? And so I think it's easier for a realist or an artifactualist to explain why that is or how that is. But I was wondering what an anti-realist, so someone like Walton, who just doesn't think there is anything such as fictional character, might explain how it is that we recognize these characters to be the same character with variations. So yeah, do you have thoughts on how an anti-realist might go about explaining that? Or is it just a clear win for the artifactualist in this case?
Well, I think that I agree with you that it is hard to defend that there is something recognized as the same through different actors in different settings. If you are an anti-realist, well, this is not a problem for me, but I have sympathy for anti-realism in the philosophy of science. I believe that it is a very sometimes very interesting position, very prudent, and it can avoid some ontological commitment that are not correct or that are mistaken. But in the case of the ontology of fictional characters, I think that the best approach is the realistic one, and I agree with Krepke and Thomason. The apparatus of quantification is available to us, but we accept readily sentences like, in the Bible, some characters are real, others not. That here we have a quantification over characters. Some of which are not concrete ones, with no clear historical records. So I think the realistic approach is the correct one. As to the anti-realist, it is not my case. I didn't have many thoughts on that. I did not worry much about what would be the case if I were in this, in adopting this position. So I cannot be very helpful in answering your question. I'm sorry, but I simply believe that the realistic view is the correct one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Peter.
Yes. The question is to all the participants, if you think it makes sense to distinguish between realists, novels or historical novels like Sherlock Holmes or Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, and sci-fi novels and movies like Harry Potter and Star Wars. Yeah, the difference is in the later, the laws of physics are not adhered to. I guess it's a very important difference. I also wonder why these movies and these novels like Harry Potter are very, very popular now. Yeah, and the second is the description, the fictional essence as presented of Sherlock Holmes. I guess it resembles more Russell's definite description than Kripke's causal chain of reference, although it was mentioned together with Kripke. So yeah, that are my two questions. Sorry, I can put this off. Yeah, I can put the camera on.
Okay, thank you. I will answer the second question. The first has been directed to the whole participants, but lambda notations is useful to form expressions with complex functions, complex properties. So what we have in the what I presented in as the Sherlock Holmes individual essence is a collection of properties that are, in my view, essential or necessary to the character Sherlock Holmes. There is no definite descriptions here involved in the, at least in the wording of my attempt to identify the individual essence in question. As to the first question, I think that what we are doing here is important, but incomplete, because we have a lot of work to do, for instance, in differentiating different categories of works of fiction. There are things that are surprising. Recently, a Brazilian filmmaker, Kleber Mendonça, has made a fictional documentary. A fictional documentary. It sounds weird at first. The title is Recife Fria. If I'm not, Italo seems to confirm. And then it's quite interesting because it has the form of a documentary, but it's all fictional. It's very, very, very interesting, very well done. So there are things surprising. We have to examine the whole terrain more with more doing the right distinction with the you mentioned science fiction.
Maybe it's different in Latin America. What I'm talking about is Harry Potter is very popular in Europe and in Asia, but maybe not that much in Latin America. Latin America, the arts are known for surrealism, extreme modernism. Like Brasília, I guess, is an extreme modernist experiment. Apart from the cars, it's a perfect experiment that Le Corbusier would have hoped to do in other places. So maybe there's a difference with Latin America. Maybe the arts in Latin America are more tending to surrealism, magic realism. Maybe Harry Potter is not that popular. Sci-fi is not that popular here too in Latin America. Yeah,
He is popular here too, and he is well known, I think, in Brazil. Well, but there are different literary genre to be distinguished, and we have a lot of work to do to make the relevant philosophical distinctions in this old world with different different parts. Okay, you are mute, Peter.
If there's an essential difference between realist novels and the sci-fi novels we see now, is there essential difference more than just a fictional documentary? But because the sci-fi movies are not Planet Earth anymore, are complete. The laws of physics are different, and I guess that's my thought experiments also relate to sci-fi thought experiments, because many people, many philosophers have objected, especially against sci-fi thought experiments. So, for instance, Twin Earth is a sci-fi thought experiment. It's more controversial because of the sci-fi nature than other. I like Brain in the Vat is also a sci-fi thought experiment. So it looks like philosophers are objecting against the sci-fi nature.
Well, Twin Earth is problematic because if on Earth we have H2O, and on Twin Earth X, Y, Z kind of water. So it is not possible to have an exactly a doppelganger, because in the bodies we have water in H2O here on Earth, and our doppelganger have a different kind of water in his body, so they are not identical after all. Well, there is this is the kind of objection that has been made to the Twin Earth thought experiment. There is one more, two more, no, one more. Thank you, Peter.
Hannah,
Anna.
Yeah, I will ask my second question if there's no other questions from people.
sure, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll go ahead. So I was really tickled to hear about the entering the fictional temporality bit when you were talking about the internal perspective that we take on when we read stories, and I was wondering if we could do a bit of metaphysics of time in the context of fiction together, where, you know, do you think they just have a different timeline and we're just dipping in and out? And if so, is that timeline just totally independent from ours? But that doesn't seem right, because we just pick up where we want to in the story, right? We can stop reading or we can stop watching. So, I mean, in some sense, it seems like fictional time is parasitic on our time. But then that gets us into, you know, this A theory, B theory, and theories of time. So I was curious of like what you think about fictional time and what is this kind of temporality that we're entering into when we read fiction or engage with fiction otherwise.
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I have a very interesting answer, but when we get involved, interested, when we dive in a story, we get involved completely. All our emotions are involved. We like the characters, or we hate other characters. We are. It seems we are a participant in the story. We are, so to speak, watching, assisting, attending to the whole process, the sequences of events described. And suddenly someone says, dinner is ready, and so you have to close the book, and everything is stopped. So the idea that the kind of temporality in a in a work of fiction can be somehow parasitic on I don't know if it is the objective time, or the kind of subjective experience of time that is described in phenomenology, for instance. This is the living present, and the way we lead to with past and future has been described by many different people. William James, Brentano, Husserl, Merleau-Ponty. That's subjective time, and the objective time used in physics, for instance, is something. It's a construction, as Kant once explained. There is nothing more like a second than another second. This is a measurable time with similar parts. This is clearly not the case in the kind of temporality. I would say it's part of our subjective experience of time. When we open a book and start reading, we get involved in it is as if the time of the novel becomes a part of our subjective time. Well, it's a difficult question. I have to think. Again, I thank you for the question because it's I believe an important point, but I have no decisive, complete answer to that question. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you again, Professor Leclerc, for your exposition, for your conference, and I'll be. Thank you, everybody who attended today. We had a nice day of discussions, a nice Bloomsday, and we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. local time here in Brazil. But please check your time conversion tools for the correct time in your zone. We are yes. The first three papers tomorrow morning will be in Portuguese, but at 10 a.m. local time here in Brazil, we will have Sam Cowling's conference, and so this will be in English, I suppose. But thank you once again, everybody, for